Hello and welcome to Auto and Operator, the podcast that discusses everything Indycar and open wheel racing related. Hi, I'm your host, or co-host I should say, Andrew Miller. Last episode, my brother Derek did a great recap of the St. Pete Grand Prix, which in and of itself was a resounding success. My take on it, I hate cautions with a passion. I understand they're necessary. I do believe IndyCar needs to implement a virtual safety car like Formula One, in that they need to not get those silly trucks and fat guys out there on the circuit because they have absolutely no sense of urgency whatsoever. And I think that truly kills the momentum of the race. And for young fans especially, I think that's a huge turnoff, just watching race cars go around at 60 miles an hour around the track. I mean, it literally looks like a parade. And it also F's up the racing, right? I mean, all the front runners got completely screwed. Now, I know next week, or next race rather, in Long Beach, it could be the exact opposite. You know, all the front runners there could just run away with the whole thing. People that were penalized this particular race at St. Pete may benefit from a caution the next race. That's not really the point. The point is that there should be less cautions in general. Now, IndyCar is unique in that it's old school. There are no runoff areas for the most part. They race on street circuits and old school road courses in America. They don't have the sophistication the way that Formula One does, in that there's huge areas for runoff, and so debris has plenty of places to go. Debris typically stays on the track. So the aero kits today are super complex. Obviously, they're going away in 2018. I think that's going to be a good thing. Less body work, or more sturdy body work, hopefully more mechanical grip versus aero grip, will all make both the racing better, less, if you will, probability for caution, and so on and so forth. However, going back to the tracks, because they're old school tracks and there isn't a lot of runoff, obviously there's a higher probability for the caution. But they need to get potentially more volunteers, or they need to establish, if you will, a higher tolerance for debris. Because in Formula One, they got people that will run out there and grab the piece of debris. Now, we don't want people on the track getting killed. That's obviously well known. And I know Formula One has much more organized runoffs and areas for the safety marshals on the sides to run out from and potentially get this debris. But we need to figure out some sort of system. As I said, virtual safety car would be a great approach, where the drivers can literally just slow down, so a safety worker can run out there, grab the debris, come back in. Drivers are told on the radio, there's a guy out there on turn 3, you're in virtual safety car mode. If somebody F's up and is not in virtual safety car mode, whether it's an engine mapping or a button they physically have to hold on the steering wheel to maintain their cars, sort of like a pit limiter type thing, they will get heavily penalized. They will get fined, they will get penalized, and a fine, unlike Formula One, may actually force someone in the IndyCar paddock to pay attention. They don't have all the money in the world, so if you're getting fined, 10 grand because you're not adhering to the virtual safety car rules, or if you cause an accident, penalize the guy for it. I think it could get really political, really messy, really quick. I think if you were penalizing people and fining them for actually causing accidents. But I do think they need to get a little bit more aggressive on limiting the amount of time and caution. I think it's a super important thing the next 2 or 3 years to ensure that there's more green racing. And the more green racing there is, to be honest, there's less of this strategic know-how, where people are trying to do all these clever strategies. Now, going back to last episode, Derek mentioned spec racing needs underdog teams winning races. Maybe the fact that we would improve the cautions, meaning that there would be less of them, might undermine the fact that underdog teams have clever strategies to get up front. But I think that it would take a few years, but eventually the underdog teams would get themselves back up there again. I can't emphasize enough that they need green racing, because Formula One is predominantly green racing, and their races are far more exciting, in my opinion, than the constant restarts and prompted drama that is IndyCar every once in a while, with all the cautions and the restarts and then the subsequent accidents from the restarts, and then people coming into the pits and doing some clever strategy, so on and so forth. I think there just needs to be more straight-up racing. I don't think the answer is doing shorter races per se, maybe a little bit shorter. I think the answer is penalizing people for making really stupid moves on the racetrack, making the cars obviously less prone to dropping just little tidbits of debris everywhere, getting a virtual safety car so that safety workers can go out there and grab the debris. Anything that we can do to not bring out the fat guys in the pickup trucks, I think would be really critical to improving the image of the sport, the pace of the races, and in general just the appeal of it. One last thing I wanted to touch on. I am a exercise professional by trade, so I have a great amount of knowledge of what different athletes go through in their given sports. IndyCar is a super unique sport in that it demands both outright strength, at least in the upper body via the arms, but also incredible endurance. Going back to the green running, if you have green running, these guys have a super high heart rate. Think of, probably 70 to 80% of their, what you would call maximum heart rate. And yet they have to exhibit, not only a high amount of aerobic capacity, but also anaerobic capacity, which is essentially what type of energy substrate a sprinter would use when they're correcting the steering wheel, or potentially taking a series of corners that have such high G loads that they can't really take a breath, right? They're using energy at that point without oxygen, hence anaerobic. There's a lot more we can get into, and certainly if there's feedback wanting a little bit more evaluation of the athletes themselves, I'd be happy to get into it. But the point today I want to make is that we need to highlight how badass these guys really are. They're gladiators. I mean, IndyCar is by far the most dangerous sport on four wheels, in my opinion. Certainly, you got sports like MotoGP and a World Superbike. Any two-wheel motorsport is certainly more prone to acute injury. But if we're talking life-ending injuries, I think there's probably no sport more dangerous than IndyCar. Just the old school circuits, as we already discussed, plus the oval racing on top of it. I think there's a lot of awkward accidents that can happen. And so these guys truly are gladiators. They're going out there knowing that they're risking their lives, right? That's how much passion they have for racing. And I think that should be admired and also showcased. And they also train and they live to perform in the car. They obviously have to maintain a large amount of strength, therefore muscle mass. But like I said, they also need to be endurance athletes. What a conundrum. From a training perspective, you have strength, and then on the opposite side of the equation, of the continuum, if you will, you have endurance. They don't necessarily come together. They do when you're a brand new trainee. Of course, you get stronger. You also increase your work capacity. But once you get to a certain point, these adaptations take different directions. So the conundrum that is training to be an IndyCar athlete is incredibly tough. So I think that needs to be showcased for new fans to really grab their attention. Hey, these guys are literally some of the most well-rounded athletes probably out there in terms of their their profiles, their endurance profiles, yet their outright strength. And, that's not even considering, the sports psychology of it. Understanding that you could die in the car. Maybe there's a big crash, during the race or before that's, affected the driver. And I think that needs to be showcased more. More of that drama, the inner turmoil or lack thereof, showcasing like how badass these guys are. I really can't emphasize that enough. So to recap, we need virtual safety cars, and we need people to run out there and get debris and avoid cautions really at all costs. I'm not for foregoing safety, but at the same time, these guys, they want to be in the cars and they want to be racing. They don't want to be going around, in a parade. And while it's bad for the sport, obviously, to be having drivers getting killed or, having, God forbid, any sort of public injury inflicted because of, a series trying to avoid cautions and making it as exciting as possible. I think there's plenty of things that they can implement to ensure green running and safe green running, as opposed to getting out the big red pickup trucks, getting tow straps out, with absolutely zero urgency. That absolutely drives me crazy, as everything in Formula One is done with urgency. Pit stops are, obviously without refueling, are like 3 seconds. Even the marshals running out on track to get debris, they're sprinting for their lives. And I think that's a great intent. It shows the intensity and the passion in the sport. And there's a lot of things that are showcased in IndyCar. The nonchalant nature maybe of the pit guys, the nonchalant nature of the safety workers, the lack of panache in the pit lane, really sloppy team gear, things of this nature. I think the entire sport could be a little bit sharper. They could do everything quicker. I think they need to showcase how badass these drivers are. We need to start reaching new fans with really exciting content that we have right in front of us. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked the episode, definitely leave a comment. Help us evolve this podcast into something that all the IndyCar fans can enjoy and that we can introduce to potentially new fans. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you after Long Beach.